The New Year's reception was held at the Charleston Grand, a place with high ceilings, soft jazz humming from the speakers, and a kind of elegance that tries a little too hard. Melissa fit into it perfectly. She always had a way of slipping into a room like she belonged there. Confident without being loud, poised without being stiff. People noticed her, even before she opened her mouth. I was used to that. I had made peace with being the one people glanced over, the husband with a drink in hand and a polite smile. My role was to support, to listen to the same story Melissa told about her recent promotion to anyone within *T. She'd earned that moment, and I wasn't going to be the guy to sulk in the corner. But there's a difference between being in someone's shadow and being made to feel like you're the shadow itself. At around 11:45 p.m., I was standing near the dessert table, sipping something expensive I couldn't pronounce, when I saw her with him. Tall guy, sharp navy suit, the kind of man who adjusts his cufflinks too often, like he's reminding everyone around him how well they fit. I recognized him vaguely from stories she told, Eric or Evan or something like that. A colleague from a different region, who, apparently, she only interacted with on calls. Only now they weren't on a call. They were standing near the back of the room in that *mate way people do when they think no one's paying attention. Melissa was fixing his tie. Literally, fingers on the knot, adjusting it like a wife would on her husband before a wedding photo. She said something and laughed. And he laughed too, looking at her, not the joke. And then she did it, that thing she does when she's comfortable. She rested her hand on his chest just for a moment. That moment lasted too long. It wasn't the hand. It wasn't even the proximity. It was the expression on her face. Soft, engaged, almost tender. That's what did it. That's what stayed with me. When she turned and noticed me watching, she didn't look guilty. She looked amused. Like I was a kid who wandered in on a conversation I wouldn't understand. She didn't wave me over. She didn't even flinch. She just went back to whatever it was they were whispering about. I didn't say anything right away. I tried not to spiral. These events weren't my scene, and Melissa knew that. I told myself I was overreacting, reading too much into it. She was networking. This was her world. But something about the whole thing didn't sit right. And I wish I could say that was the only red flag that night. It wasn't. As the countdown approached, people began gathering in the center of the ballroom. Someone handed out cheap champagne in tall glasses that made everyone feel richer than they were. A DJ who looked like he regretted all of his life choices announced it was time. The lights dimmed. Everyone clustered together for the moment. I stood next to Melissa, who had drifted back toward me with a glass in each hand. She handed me one with a bright, practiced smile. "To a new year," she said. "To us," I replied. And then, just as the clock hit midnight and the crowd began shouting numbers in unison, she raised her glass and, in a loud, theatrical voice that somehow cut through all the noise, said, "Let's all toast to my wonderful husband. Without him, I wouldn't know where any of my chargers are." Laughter. Real laughter. People actually laughed. A few turned to look at me, expecting me to laugh too. A man I didn't know gave me a sympathetic clap on the shoulder, as if to say, "Take the hit, buddy. It's just a joke." But it wasn't. It wasn't a joke to her either, not really. It was a signal. A subtle kind of distancing wrapped in humor. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Like she was reminding the room, and maybe herself, of the gap between who she was becoming and who I still was. I played along. I laughed, or at least I tried to. I remember the fizz of the champagne burning my throat. I remember the way she smiled over the rim of her glass, eyes already scanning the room for someone else to talk to. I stood there, stunned, like a man who had just been fired in front of his coworkers and told to smile through it. That was the first warning sign I couldn't unsee. When I brought it up later, after the party, after we got back to the hotel, she was still riding high from the night. We had a corner suite, courtesy of the company. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a skyline that meant nothing in the dark. She kicked off her heels, poured herself another drink, and sat on the edge of the bed like nothing had happened. "Can I ask you something?" I started. She raised an eyebrow, half amused, half distracted. "You're going to be weird about that joke, aren't you?" That stunned me. I hadn't even asked the question yet. I mean, I said, trying to stay calm. It wasn't just the joke. You and that guy, Eric or whatever, earlier you seemed close. Oh my God, she groaned, rolling her eyes. You're seriously jealous of Eric? He's a work friend, and I've known him for less than a year. You do realize I can adjust someone's tie without sleeping with them, right? That's not what I said. No, but it's what you meant. She took a sip, looked out the window, and then muttered, Jesus, you can be so sensitive sometimes. There it was. That word. Sensitive. The thing men are told not to be, especially when they're trying to express discomfort. I knew how this would go. She'd flip the script, make me the fragile one, the possessive one. And maybe she was right. Maybe I was being dramatic. But if I had said something even remotely close to what she said at that party, if I had made a joke like that about her in front of a room full of colleagues, I wouldn't have gotten a laugh. I would have gotten a slap. You didn't answer the question, I said finally. What question? Why did you touch his chest like that? She scoffed, stood up, and walked to the sink with her glass. God, it's like you're looking for a reason to be upset. Maybe don't come to these things if you're going to turn them into therapy sessions. And just like that, it was over. Conversation closed. My discomfort became the problem, not her actions. And that night, I lay next to her in a bed that suddenly felt colder than any hotel mattress had a right to be. I didn't sleep much. I stared at the ceiling and wondered when things had changed. I knew Melissa had grown more ambitious over the years, more driven. But something else had shifted lately, something deeper, harder to name. It wasn't just distance. It was replacement, like she had already started building a new life, brick by brick, while I was still standing on the foundation of the old one. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She checked her email while sipping coffee, made jokes about how much champagne she'd had, talked about how well the firm was doing. I watched her across the room, wrapped in a hotel robe, legs crossed, glowing from success and compliments. I didn't say anything, but that moment, watching her at midnight, hearing the laughter at my expense, the way her eyes flicked back to Eric after the toast, that never left me. It was the first time I really saw it, that she wasn't laughing with me anymore. She was laughing at me, and the worst part, so was everyone else. It's funny what your mind does once you let it go back through the tapes. All those moments you brushed off suddenly come into focus, and you start wondering if maybe the story had been changing for a long time, you just hadn't been watching closely enough. After that night in Charleston, things didn't blow up right away. Melissa didn't confess to anything. There were no sudden changes, no dramatic reveals. But what did happen was quieter, subtler. I began noticing things I couldn't ignore anymore. Take the phone, for example. Melissa used to leave it lying around the house like it was nothing. On the kitchen counter, in the bathroom while she showered, on the nightstand while she slept. But sometime in the weeks after that New Year's party, it became glued to her hand. If she wasn't holding it, it was flipped over, screen down. Notifications silenced. Always locked. At first, I didn't think much of it. Privacy, after all, isn't a crime. But there's a difference between privacy and secrecy, and I was starting to understand that the line between the two was thinner than I'd wanted to believe. I remember one afternoon, she was sitting on the couch typing something quickly, her face angled away from me. I asked what she was working on, and she immediately locked the phone and looked up, blinking like she'd just been caught in a lie she hadn't prepared for. Oh, nothing. Just a client issue. I nodded. That should have been enough. But my gut said otherwise. Then there were the work dinners. At first, they were once or twice a month. Something Melissa said came with the territory now that she was on a senior track. These weren't just meals, she explained. They were about strategy, bonding, optics. I got that. I wanted to be supportive. But the dinners started ending later and later. First, it was 9 p.m., then midnight. Then, I ended up staying with a colleague because the roads were icy. And always, her tone was just a little too rehearsed. Like the story was ready before I even asked. One night, I called her around 11 to check in. She didn't answer. No big deal. I figured she was in the middle of something. But when she finally called me back, close to 1 a.m., she sounded winded. Not tired, winded. Like she'd had to move fast to get somewhere quiet. "Hey," she said, voice low. "Sorry, it's been insane. We're just now finishing." "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just long day. That was it. No elaboration. No offer to call back when she wasn't whispering like someone might hear her." When she got home the next morning, wearing clothes from the night before, carrying her shoes in her hand, she looked at me like I was the one who needed to explain something. "Why are you up?" she asked, setting her bag down. I wanted to laugh. "It's 7 in the morning. I told you I might crash at Nicole's," she added. "We were drinking. It didn't make sense to drive." "Right," I said. "Just next time, maybe let me know?" Her eyes narrowed. "So now I need permission to not die in a car crash? That's not what because I don't remember signing that clause in our marriage vows." There it was again. That defensive wall. One I couldn't get over and couldn't get through. She walked upstairs and shut the door, and I sat there on the couch wondering if I just accused her of something, or if she had just made me feel like I had. After that, things kept stacking. She started wearing perfume again. Not just the light kind she used to spray before brunch, but the bold stuff, complex, expensive, with that musky note that clung to her like a secret. She never wore it around me. Only when she was going out. Only when it was another dinner or just a strategy session. I once commented on it, half joking. Trying to impress a client? She smiled at herself in the mirror, fixing an earring. "I like how it makes me feel." That should have been a good enough answer. But the look in her eyes? That haunted me. And then came the photos. Or rather, the lack of them. Melissa used to post about everything. Vacations, birthdays, even our lazy weekends. Our anniversary last fall. She'd uploaded an entire carousel. 7 photos of us smiling over brunch and drinks, captions full of inside jokes. But now, nothing. Not a single mention. She'd gone dark on our relationship. Deleted a few older posts too. The anniversary pictures were gone. Even the tagged photos I posted weren't showing on her profile anymore. When I brought it up carefully, she shrugged. "I'm just cleaning up my grid," she said. "Trying to be more professional." "Right?" I said. "So we're unprofessional now?" She laughed, but not kindly. "God, do you hear yourself?" I did, and that was the problem. I was starting to hear myself all the time, second-guessing every word before I said it. Because lately, everything I said made her tired, or annoyed, or deeply inconvenienced. Even when I wasn't saying anything at all. She stopped asking about my day. Stopped waiting for me to come to bed. Most nights, she stayed up watching TV in the guest room, or claiming she needed space to work in peace. At first, I tried to give her that space. But space quickly turned into absence. Emotional, physical, everything. I remember once waking up at 2 a.m. and finding her on the patio, sitting barefoot with a glass of wine, just staring into the dark. "You okay?" I asked through the sliding door. She jumped slightly, like she hadn't expected me to be awake. "Yeah," she said, not turning around. "Just thinking. I didn't push, but I should have." I told myself it was a phase, that she was under pressure at work, that I was being paranoid. But paranoia doesn't come out of nowhere. It grows in silence. And we had a lot of that now. I'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling while she was downstairs, laughing quietly on the phone. No names. No context. I tried not to be the guy who checks call logs. I tried not to be the guy who wonders if she's texting someone else while we're in the same room. But one night, she left her phone on the bathroom sink while she showered. And it lit up. Eric. That name again. Just Eric. No last initial. No emoji. Just a name and a preview of a message I will never forget. "Tonight was amazing. I still can't believe you said that." That was it. That was the moment I knew. Not because of the message, but because of what happened next. I didn't open it. I didn't touch the phone. I just walked out of the bathroom and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to breathe. When she came out, she picked up the phone immediately, checked the screen, and froze. Then she looked at me, slowly, and smiled. Not sheepishly, not nervously, just calmly, like we were both in on something now. That was the scariest part. The calm. Because I realized she wasn't worried I'd seen it. She didn't care. And that told me more than the message ever could. The morning I found the email, I wasn't even looking for it. Melissa had left her laptop open on the dining table, a rare oversight. Normally, she was meticulous about logging out, closing tabs, clearing her history like someone who didn't want to leave footprints behind. But that day, maybe she was in a rush. Maybe she'd gotten careless. Or maybe, deep down, she didn't care if I saw it. I wish I could say I stumbled upon it by accident. That I was checking the weather or paying a bill and just happened to notice something suspicious. But the truth is, I hesitated for all of 2 seconds before I sat down and clicked into the open tab. It was her email, her personal one. The one she used for everything not related to work, which had become increasingly separate from me in every sense. At first, there were just newsletters and Amazon receipts. I nearly backed out. But then I saw his name, Eric, not as a sender, as a folder. She had an entire folder labeled Eric. My hands were sweating. My chest felt like it was being compressed by invisible hands. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew whatever I was about to find, I wouldn't be able to forget. But I opened it. The most recent message was dated 2 nights ago. Subject line, last Thursday. I clicked, still thinking about that night. I keep playing it back in my head. How you looked when I opened the door. How you smiled when you walked in like you'd been there before. I didn't want it to end. I hate that we had to sneak around. But honestly, that made it even hotter. There was more, but I stopped reading. I leaned back in the chair and just stared at the screen. Not sure if I should scream or laugh or throw the laptop through the window. The words felt unreal, like something from a badly written affair novel. But the gut punch came with the next line. Tell your husband next time he leaves town. I'll be waiting. So it wasn't just flirty emails. It wasn't emotional cheating. It wasn't a vague gray area. It was real. It was physical. It was deliberate. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just sat there, numb, staring at the evidence that my marriage had been rerouted months ago, and I'd been following a ghost ever since. She'd brought him to our home. That was what gutted me. Our apartment wasn't just a space. It was the place where we built the ordinary, invisible rhythms of life, where we argued over groceries, where we danced once in the kitchen while pasta boiled over, where we slept in the same bed under the illusion of trust. And she'd brought him there. Suddenly, every work dinner, every late night, every cold shoulder made sense. The tight smiles, the silence, the perfume, the avoidance. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a drunken lapse or a blurred line. This was a life. A second, secret life I hadn't been invited to. I went back into the inbox, hoping I was wrong. Hoping maybe it was one email, one mistake. But the folder was full. At least a dozen messages, all from the past few months. Hotel confirmations, logistics, late-night confessions disguised as poetry, private jokes that made me feel like a trespasser in my own story. One stood out, a reply from Melissa. The subject line read, Thursday, and the dog story LOL. I clicked. He's going to Chicago for a conference next week. Should be clear. But if not, I'll come up with something, don't worry. I've gotten good at this. That was it. That was the sentence that ended something inside me. I've gotten good at this. I sat there, breathing through clenched teeth, reading it again and again like it might suddenly change into something less awful. But it didn't. I closed the laptop and sat in silence, letting the wave of reality crash over me. She wasn't slipping. She wasn't torn. She was managing this, planning it, executing it. I thought back to all the times I'd blamed myself. For being tired. For being distant. For not texting enough during the day. For working too late or forgetting to pick up oat milk. I had worn my guilt like a jacket I never questioned. But now I realized none of that mattered. This wasn't about small cracks in a marriage. This was betrayal in its sharpest form. The quiet kind, the confident kind. The kind that moves like a shadow through your home, learning how not to be seen. I didn't confront her immediately. I didn't throw the laptop or call her office or send her *TS. I just shut down. That day passed like a fog. I ate nothing. I wandered the apartment, touching things that suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. The couch, the doorway, the bed. All of it felt staged, like a set where something ugly had already happened and the crew forgot to strike it. At one point, I found myself in the closet, staring at her dresses. The blue one she wore to our 5th anniversary dinner was still hanging next to the blazer she wore the day she got promoted. I wondered if she'd worn either of them to see him. I wondered how many times I'd hugged her after a night out and smelled someone else on her without even knowing it. The strange how grief can sneak up on you while you're still in the middle of what caused it. That evening, she came home like it was any other day. She walked through the door talking on her phone, kicked off her heels, smiled at me from the hallway. "Hey babe, I'm starving. What are you thinking for dinner?" She had no idea. None. I looked at her, watched the way she tossed her keys into the bowl near the door, the way she peeled off her jacket and shook out her hair like she had nothing to hide. And in that moment, something in me shifted. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I felt absence, like I was already watching her from a distance. I didn't respond right away, just nodded and mumbled something about takeout. She didn't notice, or maybe she didn't care. She walked into the bedroom, talking about how cold the office had been, how her assistant screwed up a report. Mundane things, surface noise. I went into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and stared at the leftovers we wouldn't eat. My hands were trembling. My thoughts were tangled. I needed time, so I waited. Over the next few days I acted normal, or at least tried to. I answered her questions. I watched a movie with her one night. I said, "I love you" out of habit, even though it burned on the way out. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not until I figured out what I wanted from it. But I did start watching more carefully. She didn't notice the change in me. Or maybe she was just that confident. She kept up her routine. Late nights, private calls, little lies she probably didn't even think about anymore. And all the while I was collecting evidence. Not for revenge. Not even for leverage. For clarity. I needed to know the shape of the hole she'd carved into our life. One night, while she slept, I went back to the laptop. I copied the emails, saved them to a drive. I wasn't sure if I'd ever use them, but I needed to know they existed somewhere outside of my head. The next morning, she kissed me on the cheek and said she'd be home late. "I'm meeting a client," she said, grabbing her bag. "Don't wait up." And with that, she walked out the door, just like she had so many times before. And I watched her go, knowing that this time, I wouldn't be here when she got back. The strange thing was how normal everything looked. When Melissa returned that evening, hours after she said she'd be home, nothing about her seemed shaken. No guilt, no nerves, not even a flicker of recognition that she'd been discovered. She set her bag down, kicked off her shoes, and made her way into the kitchen like she lived in a world where nothing had changed. I was sitting at the table, staring at the untouched takeout I had ordered more out of habit than hunger. She gave me a quick smile. "Long day," she muttered, opening the fridge. "Do we still have that Chardonnay?" Took me a moment to find my voice. "Top shelf, behind the oat milk." She pulled it out, humming a song under her breath as she reached for a glass. I watched her move, fluid and sure, as if the last few months hadn't been a meticulously crafted betrayal. And that was the moment I knew. She didn't think she'd been caught. Or worse. She thought she'd built enough distance from the truth that even if I had suspicions, she could still steer the narrative. She poured herself a drink, took a long sip, and leaned against the counter. "You okay? You're quiet tonight." I gave a non-committal shrug. "Just tired." Melissa walked over and placed her glass next to mine, then sat down across from me. "You sure? You've been acting weird lately." That almost made me laugh. "I've been acting weird? I guess I'm just processing a lot," I said slowly, watching her reaction. She didn't flinch. "Work stress." I nodded. Among other things. She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her fingers were cool. Her voice softened into something between concern and careful calculation. I know things have been tense lately, she said, but I don't want us to lose each other over it. Her tone was perfect, measured, sincere on the surface. I don't either, I said, and that was the beginning of it. Her attempt to rewrite reality, to dress the cracks in clean words and rehearsed warmth. It was subtle at first. Over the next few days, she started acting like we were a couple in a rom-com trying to reconnect. She made French toast one morning, the kind with cinnamon and powdered sugar, the kind she hadn't bothered to cook in years. She kissed me on the forehead like we hadn't been sleeping in separate emotional beds for months. She offered to watch one of my favorite old movies, even though she'd always rolled her eyes at it. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have believed it was effort. But now I saw it for what it was, strategy. She wasn't sorry. She was stalling. I played along. I smiled. I thanked her for breakfast. I let her cuddle up next to me during the movie, even as every cell in my body tensed under her touch. One evening, we took a walk around the neighborhood. It was cold. She wore a scarf I'd given her 2 Christmases ago, the same one she had called a little too much when she opened the box. Now, she wore it like a relic of a happier time. It's nice being out like this, she said. We should do it more often. I didn't answer right away. We passed a couple walking their dog, laughing about something only they understood. I wondered if they'd ever felt this, the ache of being beside someone who felt miles away. When we got home, Melissa slipped into the kitchen to heat up leftovers. I stood in the hallway, staring at the door to the guest room, the room she had claimed for herself for better focus during the day, but where she now slept more often than not. That night, she climbed into our bed instead. It was the first time in weeks. I lay there stiffly, barely breathing, pretending to sleep while she curled into me like muscle memory. Her hand found my chest. Her breath slowed against my shoulder. I didn't move. The next morning, she made coffee and sat at the table in her robe, scrolling through her phone like a woman who had earned peace. She had settled into a new version of events, one where we were repairing things, finding our rhythm again, moving past a rough patch. But I hadn't forgotten the emails. I hadn't forgotten Eric. And I certainly hadn't forgotten the way she'd looked when she adjusted his tie, smiling like she already knew how the story ended. One afternoon, she came home early. I was in the middle of reorganizing a box of our old photos, deciding which ones I wanted to keep, which ones I could stomach letting go of. She walked in, surprised. "You're going through those?" "Yeah," I said. "Just felt like it was time." She walked over and crouched beside me, pulling out a photo of us from a trip to Asheville. Fall colors, flannel shirts, fake grins. She smiled at it like it still meant something. "God, I loved that weekend," she said. "Did you?" She looked up, frowning slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" I met her gaze. "I don't know. Just wondering how much of what we had was real." She stood slowly. "Is this about Charleston again? Because if you're still hung up on that joke." "It's not about the joke," I said, more sharply than I meant to. "It's about everything after." There it was, a flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not guilt, annoyance. "Mark," she said, her voice dipping into that practiced softness again. "We've been through this. Things were tense. We lost touch. But we're trying now, right?" I said nothing. She crossed her arms. "Do you want to fix this or not?" That's when I realized she didn't want to talk about what she had done. She wanted to talk about my reaction to it. In her mind, the problem wasn't the betrayal. The problem was that I noticed. She was rebranding the entire timeline. She wanted to make this about marriage fatigue, emotional distance, missed signals. Anything but what it actually was, her choosing someone else while still sleeping in our bed. She stepped closer. "We can start fresh. Just, let's stop picking at every scab, okay?" I stared at her and saw a woman not ready to be forgiven, but to be cleared. And I wouldn't give her that. Later that night, she cooked dinner. Chicken piccata. Salad with the dressing I liked. She lit a candle, played jazz, It was all very deliberate, like a carefully staged photo op. We sat across from each other, eating in near silence. At one point, she reached for my hand. I let her. She smiled. "Feels nice, doesn't it?" I didn't respond. I was looking at the way her fingers still wore the ring I gave her, the same ring she had taken off in one of the emails. I left it in the drawer like we said. Don't worry. The food tasted fine. The wine was smooth. The candle flickered like we were in some int**mate commercial for forgiveness. But it was hollow. She wanted to reset the story. Pretend the last chapter didn't happen. Start from the middle and hope I'd forgotten the beginning. But I hadn't. And I wouldn't. There was no single moment that pushed me over the edge. No dramatic climax. No slamming doors or explosive arguments. The decision came slowly, like water rising in a flooded room. Inch by inch, day by day, until I realized I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. Melissa thought we were rebuilding. She had eased into a version of the story where she was the one doing the work. The one initiating touch, cooking dinners, planning weekend walks like we were college kids trying to fix something fragile and beautiful. But all of it was layered in performance. A role she played just convincingly enough to confuse me if I hadn't already seen the script. She never mentioned Eric again. Never apologized. Never confessed. She was content to pretend the emails, the lies, and the long nights never happened. But I couldn't pretend. Not anymore. The night I made my decision, it was raining. The kind of slow, persistent rain that makes everything feel quieter. Melissa was upstairs on a video call. Something about quarterly metrics and scaling solutions. I was in the garage, sitting in the car with the engine off, listening to the soft patter of water on the roof. I wasn't planning my exit. Not yet. I was just existing in a space where I didn't have to act. And I realized that was all I wanted. Silence. Truth. Stillness. Something that didn't require performance. So I made a choice. Not loud. Not vengeful. Just final. The next morning, I started quietly collecting her things. Not everything. Not the obvious stuff, clothes, toiletries, books. That would have signaled confrontation. I wanted precision. Symbols. Pieces of the life she was building elsewhere. I started with the framed photo from her office, the one of her and Eric at the regional conference. She had said it was a team picture, but I remembered the angle of his hand on her lower back. I remembered how quickly she flipped the frame face down the night I asked about it. Into the box it went. Next, the perfume. That small, expensive bottle of something musky and floral she only ever sprayed before going out for work drinks. I had sniffed it once after she left, trying to find a memory of us in it. But there was nothing. Just her and whoever she became when she wasn't around me. That too went into the box. Then came the gifts he'd given her. I knew them now. The silver bracelet she insisted she bought for herself. The silk scarf I had seen in an email attachment. The subject line read, "Looks better on you than the mannequin winking face." Into the box. Piece by piece, I filled it with things that no longer belonged in our shared life. I wasn't erasing her, I was drawing a line. At the bottom of the box, I placed a printed copy of one email. Just one. Not the most explicit. Not the cruelest. Just enough to make it clear. I knew. It was the one that ended with, "He won't understand. But you do." Folded, clean. No rage in the gesture. Just evidence of clarity. I taped the box shut and left it by the door of the guest room. Her room now, though neither of us ever said it aloud. I didn't include a note. She'd know. Then I went to our bedroom, my bedroom, and started packing a small duffel. Not everything. Just enough. A few shirts. A jacket. My toothbrush. The journal I hadn't written in for months because I was afraid of what the pages might reveal. I wasn't running away. I was stepping out. She came home early that evening, earlier than I expected. The box was still by the door. She saw it immediately and froze. "What's this?" she asked, setting her keys down slowly. I didn't look up from the kitchen counter where I was folding a shirt. "Things you'll want," I said. Her voice was cautious, tight. "What do you mean?" I turned to her then, calm, tired, certain. "You're building something new," I said. I figured you'd need the pieces. She didn't move. Her eyes flicked between the box and me. Is this a joke? No, I said. She stepped closer, touched the edge of the cardboard. Her fingers hesitated. Then she saw the email folded neatly on top. Her hand recoiled like it had been burned. A silence stretched between us. Mark, there's no need, I said, cutting her off gently. No explanation. No apology. She blinked, stunned. You're just what done? Yes. Her voice sharpened, pushing past disbelief into something harder. You don't even want to talk about it? About us? There is no us, Melissa. There's you and there's me. And somewhere along the way we stopped being the same thing. She stepped back like she'd been struck. So that's it? 10 years and you just pack a box? No, I said. You packed it. I'm just handing it to you. Her jaw tensed. I could see the cracks forming. Not in her mask, but in the story she'd built around herself. The one where she was misunderstood, not guilty. Misguided, not cruel. Where are you going? She asked finally. I don't think that matters anymore. She nodded once, tightly. Wow. I waited. She didn't say anything else. No tears. No confession. No desperate reach across the space between us. And I was grateful. Because if she had begged, if she had collapsed into some version of the woman I married, I might have hesitated. I might have faltered. And I couldn't afford that. Not anymore. That night I didn't sleep at home. I drove to a motel just outside the city. It wasn't glamorous. Faded carpets, buzzing light above the mirror. A bed that creaked when I sat on it. But for the first time in months I breathed. Not deeply, not fully, but I breathed. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Just the soft glow of the screen in a dark room where no one expected anything from me. And I felt free. The next morning I woke early. I watched the sunrise through a dirty window and made a decision. I would not return to the house. Not as a resident. Not as a husband. That chapter was closed. No fight. No spectacle. Just silence and space. I rented a storage unit. I found a small, short-term lease on a furnished apartment across town. I told no one except my brother. I didn't update my address right away. I let the world think I was still in orbit around the woman I had married. But I wasn't. I had become the ghost this time. Quiet, clean, disappearing from her world the same way she had once vanished from mine. The only thing I left behind, besides the box, was my key. I slid it onto the kitchen counter before I left. No note, no farewell. Just a silent agreement that I was no longer a character in her story, and that she was no longer in mine. I left before sunrise, no goodbyes, no explanations. Just silence, and for once it felt like freedom, not punishment. I didn't look back. I found a small apartment above a repair shop on the edge of the city. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I spent my days fixing things with my hands. Watches, radios, small engines. Anything that required focus and steadiness. Slowly, I started to feel like a person again. Not someone's disappointment. Not someone's shadow. Just me. People knew my name without knowing my story. That anonymity felt like peace. And in that quiet, I began to remember who I was before everything fell apart. A month later, she reached out. One message. Simple. Can we talk? But there was nothing left to say. I had already lived the conversation she wanted to have, again and again in my mind. Her betrayal hadn't started with that night. It had started long before midnight, long before the joke. That was just the reveal, not the rupture. I never answered her message. Not out of anger, but because I was finally free. Closure didn't come from her. Came from walking away.